Remember those players you picked up a few weeks ago? Looked like they might be league winners off the waiver wire, and now not so much. What do you do with these guys? Is it time to move on, or do you hold on and hope for a resurgence? Let's check the panic meter on some of these early season wonders, guys that look like waiver saviors, except they've just gone ice cold. And let's start with a guy in Oakland, Brent Rooker, who had bounced around, hadn't really found a home, hadn't really ever been able to stay healthy and produce consistently when he's on the field. Well, he's been breaking out, and if you look at the season-long stats and especially his StatCast profile, you'll see it looks like he's still red hot. Got some great numbers there, comparable with a lot of these stud players that you drafted really high. If you look just at the last couple of weeks, it's a totally different story. One of the great things you can get off StatCast is these rolling lines, like, for example, xWOBA, which is the expected weighted on-base average. And that tells you, these rolling lines tell you how they performed over the last 50 or 100 plate appearances compared to the previous 50 or 100, whatever, 250 plate appearances. Bad news for Rooker is, as hot as he was, now he's going the opposite direction, plunging straight down. His rolling xWOBA, which tells how effectively he has and should be getting on base in every way, down 117 points over the last 100 plate appearances. His rolling X slugging percentage is down by 211, and those are some of the bottom in the majors. Now, there's two ways to look at it. First of all, you have to admit that he was so hot in the beginning of the year that, of course, he had nowhere to go but down, so it's going to make that drop look a lot more pronounced than it maybe really is. I mean, if he had just been playing like baseline for his career or just major league average even, it wouldn't have been as big a drop compared to his previous 100 plate appearances. At the same time, he has really done not much of anything lately. It's been a tale of 2 months for Rooker. In April, hit .358 with 9 home runs and 22 RBIs. And again, you have to realize this is in Oakland, which is not a team loaded with talent on offense or pitching, and it's not a hitter-friendly environment. So very impressive that he was able to pull that off. Looked like he was legit. And then May came around. So far in May, hitting just .196 with 2 home runs and 10 RBIs. The other significant stat is that his strikeouts have more than doubled despite having fewer plate appearances compared to the previous month. So which Rooker do we believe? Is he going to bounce back then, swing the other way, or is it now what we see is what we're getting? I mean, I'd like to say that the answer is somewhere in between, but realistically, I think we have to look at the fact that he's really swinging and missing a lot. The plate discipline has lost him. I think pitchers have adjusted here, and so I don't think he'll struggle this badly. He'll make some corrections in turn, but man, that early season hot streak, I think it's looking more like a flash in the pan. This is a guy who's not still an up-and-coming prospect. He's 29 at this point. Like I say, he's been a journeyman already, so I don't know that I can buy in. If you did have Rooker and you were able to sell him at peak value a couple of weeks ago, congrats, good on you. At this point, if you still have him, I mean, you could hold on, keep him on your bench, but it's looking like that first month of the season is pretty much all he's going to offer for you in fantasy this year. And then a guy who was hot right out of the gate, another outfielder on the West Coast, I'm talking about James Outman for the Dodgers. Well, he was bound to cool off, but he's done more than that. If you look at those rolling leaderboards, he is dead last as far as last 100 plate appearances for rolling xWOBA, xBA, and X slugging. Nobody has gotten colder from this month to last than James Outman. It's gotten to the point where his batting average on the season is down to .235. He's still got a fair amount of counting stats on the year, but it's almost like what he's done the last couple of weeks, his counteracting whatever help he gave you those first couple of weeks. And especially if you did pick him up, after a week or two into the season and you missed some of the best games that he had to offer, overall really hasn't been that beneficial to your roster. So where are we on the panic meter with him? What do we expect going forward? Well, I do have some bad news. If you look at it on the season, his expected batting average is among the lowest in the league. It's .203. So that batting average really should be worse. And the K rate is up to 35.8%, one of the worst in the league also. That means this is a guy who's really just not hitting that well. at all. The Dodgers have plenty of pieces they can move in and out. They're not going to give him that long of a leash, unlike a player who's in, say, Oakland. Well, I don't know that Outman is necessarily going to lose playing time or at-bats right now, but it is definitely possible. So I don't know if you can get out from under him at this point. He just isn't that valuable as trade bait anymore, which is why I did advise to move on from him a couple of weeks ago, if you look at my buy low, sell high video. Right now, at this point with Outman, I think you've got a bench. You're going to have to wait and see if it turns around. If you're ready to move on and you need to pick up somebody else who can help you in a certain category, I wouldn't hesitate to do it. One more outfielder. Let's talk about Jarren Duran in Boston, a young player who's got plenty of upside. And this is a guy who may be legit, and he looked like he was going to break through as soon as he got called up this season. In his first 50 plate appearances this season, he was hitting almost 400, stole a couple of bases, was driving in runs, collecting multiple hits in games, looking like a guy that the Red Sox were envisioning. Didn't happen last year for him, but maybe this was the year. But as the season has gone on, he started to cool off in a big way. In fact, went hitless in 5 straight games, bounced back with a 2-hit game, and then went hitless again. So that average has plummeted by 50 points just over the past week. And just like Outman, I'm concerned because the strikeout rate is way too high, 29.8% on the season. This is a guy as a lefty who is hitting righties really well, hitting lefties okay, not really struggling. But I'm worried that there's going to now all of a sudden be a platoon, because you might remember a guy who was also an early hot waiver wire pickup. In fact, he was the hottest hitter in all of baseball, and that's Adam Duvall. Well, then he got shelled with injury, but he's on the way back. He might be back soon, and as a power hitting righty, I could definitely see Duran and Duvall sharing time here, which is going to definitely eat into Duran's fantasy value, if he even has fantasy value left based on how badly he's been hitting lately. At this point, you've got to be panicked about Duran. I mean, he still has upside because he's got a little bit of power, a little bit of speed, but I think that his days of being a regular outfielder in fantasy lineups, unless you go 5 deep and you're a really deep league, I think it's almost over. So he's a bench player, a platoon player, really maybe just a DFS only option at best. Onto the pitching side, there's a guy I know I've talked about a couple of times already this year. First, as a hot waiver wire pickup, and then as someone to sell high once you could. If you didn't do that, then you might be a little worried if you still have Graham Ashcraft, guy for the Cincinnati Reds. He finally got back into the win column just tonight. He did earn the victory, gave up 3 runs, all just on a home run by Patrick Wisdom against the Cubs. So looks a little bit better than he has, but that's only because he's been so awful lately. Even in his latest win, he gave up 3 runs. Well, that seems to be the trend. He's given up at least 3 runs in each of the last 5 starts. But what's worse is he's given up at least 7 in 3 of those starts. So we've had a couple of disastrous starts, and his ratios just ballooned. I'd like to say that maybe there's some optimism he can bounce back to his early season form, but there really isn't, because a lot of times when you look at these players who maybe have good starts, bad starts, and can alternate, even with the ratios maybe hurting you along the way, you can get away with it if you're getting you either a ton of Ks or wins. Well, Ashcraft is not doing either. Cincinnati, not good enough team where they can necessarily support him on offense every night like they just did tonight, but also his strikeout rate is way too low for any sort of fantasy relevant pitcher who's not rock solid in terms of ERA and WHIP. He's got an 18% strikeout rate. This is a guy who depends on his defense. He's a ground ball pitcher. He needs to have some good batted ball luck. He needs to avoid the home run ball. And man, when he's not doing that, he looks really bad. He's just an inconsistent spot starter, and I don't know when I want to pick my spots with him, but I'm probably just not. So he's best left to the waiver wire. And there is one player I'm going to hold out a little bit of optimism for here, and that is Jordan Montgomery of the St. Louis Cardinals. He's been kind of a solid, not spectacular lefty for a couple of seasons now, someone who won't hurt you, but doesn't really do a lot for your fantasy team. Well, after his first 3 starts this season in St. Louis, he was getting picked up all over the place because not only was he limiting damage, but all of a sudden he was striking out a lot more guys than usual. Well, then his 4th start of the year, he got lit up. Those ratios went up. Then he settled down and then had another rough start a couple of times back. Kind of the same old Montgomery. He's been solid for the most part. He doesn't walk batters, which is definitely good, right? 6% walk rate, and that's been his thing throughout his career. But also not a high strikeout guy. Right now, I'm a little concerned the swinging strike rate, which is a big indicator for strikeout potential, is at 10%. And usually he's at least at 12%. I know not a guy who's going to get a lot of strikeouts, but it's been lower than usual. Those high strikeout numbers from early in the season have gone way down. His most recent start, which just happened, he gave up 2 runs over 5 innings. Solid, nothing great. And I'll just say this is what I expect from Montgomery going forward. A guy who's going to eat up some innings. He'll be okay in terms of strikeouts, but nothing great. So he needs to be spot on with his control, but he is. Like I said, he doesn't walk batters. He usually doesn't get into a lot of trouble with a home run ball, and so I think he'll be fine. He's a low-end rotation option, not much more. If you really bought into him being all of a sudden an ace early in the season, that was probably a mistake. And look, I liked Montgomery a lot going into this year. You know, if you watch my preseason videos, I mentioned him as a sleeper because I like where he was getting taken. He offers you help across your ratios, solid strikeout rate, and should get a lot of wins in St. Louis. Man, that whole St. Louis team has been just kind of wacky this year, up and down. But I still think you can hold on to him. Those are some recent names that you might be worried about. If you want to know who I'm just done with, check out my cut list video where I tell you who you should just move on from completely.